Hello, everyone. This is Abby Small with MC Deck Discussions or Marvel Champions Deck Discussions, and we're here to do another deck discussion. So this is called Close Encounters of the Deadpool Kind, a Deadpool deck with Wasp. And originally I wasn't going to post this, but this is a special deck for me. So first of all, I was inspired to create this deck by one of the videos from, Boom Guy's channel. Just a sec. Let's find that. So right here called, let's go full screen, okay, called Exploring Community Decks in Marvel Champions, All Hands Index number 9. So in this episode, which I highly recommend the entire series. So if you haven't started this series, you might as well start it from the first one. You won't miss out by going to by starting over at the beginning. But in this particular one, so Andy R., so he's the one pictured here in the upper right, he had featured this deck, Ant in the Pool. I think this is the deck he had featured. It might have been Boom Guy. But they discussed this deck and featured it, and we're showing, so talking about this deck. And then one of the things they proposed was a challenge to put in some elements of the pool, create a deck from the community to create a deck that was a pool deck that had some of the riskier elements in it, which I tend not to do. I am highly risk averse when it comes to my decks. I build decks to win, and when I start putting in elements in a deck that feel less win-ish, then they get cut from my decks. I see better cards to play, and this is coming from a solo perspective. I think if I were building more multiplayer decks, or any multiplayer decks for that matter, then I would tend to put some more of those elements into the decks because they can fit very well in multiplayer decks, a lot of times better than they can in the single player decks. But since I play solo only, then I tend to eliminate those. So I decided to go ahead and try to meet this challenge. And it was just a real stretch for me trying to create more riskier elements into a deck. So I tried a She-Hulk deck first, and I actually started with Wasp and then and it wasn't risky enough. And then I went over to, it didn't have enough risky cards in it. And then I went over and tried She-Hulk, and that one really wasn't working when I was playtesting it, though it worked okay. But then it gave me an idea to come back to the Wasp deck. So that's why I am creating this deck that you saw a little bit ago. So let's go back to it now. All right, so this Close Encounters of the Deadpool Kind. And by the way, the title of this deck comes from, a lot of you who might be closer to my age, or even within a couple of decades of my age, would have heard of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and where the third kind in this case is the Deadpool kind, and they come in due to Deadpool's core ship. So this is kind of a cool card, right? So Deadpool's core ship, it only costs 1. It's a support. And action, exhaust Deadpool core ship and deal yourself 1 face down encounter card. Then you can put a pool ally into play from your hand. So you can probably guess I have some pool allies in this deck, but this also leads to part of the title of the deck because you're putting an encounter card into play. So let's go back to the previous screen. And sure enough, you see here, we have Bob, Agent of Hydra, a 2-cost card with 1 thwart and 1 attack. And all of these pool allies, by the way, if you happen not to know, they don't have consequential damage, so they can stay out forever if if there's nothing to take them out, or you don't defend with them. So 1 thwart, 1 attack, and he has this response: after Bob, Agent of Hydra, enters play, deal 2 damage to an enemy or remove 1 threat from a scheme, and you have this extra cost where it has an acceleration icon that impacts the game. Okay, so but that title, Close Encounters of the Deadpool Kind, so that extra encounter card comes into play due to utilizing the Deadpool core ship. In addition, we also have in here in the player side schemes, we have Live Dangerously. So that's another pool card. Has victory 0. So actually, once you defeat this scheme, this player side scheme, it will be removed from the game. And each identity gets +2 hand size, but it puts all 4 of these, you might say, dangerous icons into play. So we have the hazard icon. Where is that? Over on the right. That again adds another encounter card. So that again, that helped lead to me choosing this title. Plus, it was inspired by the fact that I did a deck comparison with one of Boom Guy's decks in an earlier video where it also was referred to a movie. So I just wanted to come back to that again, especially since this deck was inspired from one of Boom Guy's videos, along with Andy R's comments. What is his channel called again? Let me make sure. Yes, his channel is called Winning Hand, and he also has a separate podcast as well that he does. So again, please go check out his stuff. I imagine a lot of you already have. So some great material there. All right, so that's it for the items that have to do with this title, but you can already see the elements of risk in there. So Deadpool core ship, bringing in pool allies and costing you a face down encounter card. Live dangerously, having the crisis icon that also gives an extra encounter card, but it has all 4 icons on it, so you also can't thwart the main scheme due to the crisis icon. Has an acceleration token, and it also has the amplify token. So whenever the villain makes an attack or schemes, they get +1 to that attack or scheme. So those are some of the riskier elements. In addition to, as you get these allies out, we already mentioned Bob, Agent of a Hydra, adds an extra acceleration token. Headpool adds an amplify token. For Headpool, he's a 3-cost ally, 2 thwart and 1 attack, and he has this added response that's a really cool response. So Headpool is my favorite of the pool cards, the one most likely to make it into my decks already. And that is this response: after Headpool attacks and damages a minion, that minion attacks another enemy of your choice. So it's really cool, especially if you have multiple minions out and you have one minion attack another minion and defeat it. That is one of my favorite things to do. But of course, you can also use that minion to attack the villain. And so that's one of my favorites. Again, notice no consequential damage there. By the way, just as a reminder what that looks like in a regular ally, so it's this symbol right here, right? So this little star looks like a ninja star, actually. So that's the icon that indicates consequential damage. And then we also have Kidpool in here. So Kidpool is a 3-cost ally, 1 thwart, 2 attack. He has this special ability. His Kidpool's attacks gain piercing. And again, he has an acceleration icon out here. And then we also have Lady Deadpool, which is a 4-cost ally, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 3 hit points. And has this special ability: when defeated, defeat a non-elite minion, and has the amplify icon on. And as long as I'm on Lady Deadpool, in the final test, when I tested this deck, when I was going up against Expert, which one is that? Where's my tested against Sabretooth? When I was going up against Expert Sabretooth, I actually had Lady Deadpool out in play in the very first round, and she stayed in play the entire game. So I got to do 2 thwart and 2 attack the entire game. Of course, you have this extra amplify icon, but relatively speaking, that's to me the least harmful of them, and especially if you're using a lot of allies when the villain is attacking, that becomes meaningless most of the time, as long as there's no overkill. That amplify icon becomes meaningless when you're defending with those allies. And notice this deck comes with a plentitude of allies. So we have 10 of them in here. So these allies are chosen specifically, and we should mention right away here. So Wasp, I've covered Wasp before, but it's always good to get a reminder about this. So actually, that's not the one I want to see. Here, let's bring it up on a separate screen. So this is on Hall of Heroes. It's called Hall of Heroes LCG.com. And you just go through and you can search for Wasp. And when you look through the release schedule for Marvel Champions, And so they're the hero abilities, but that's not really what I care about right now. So we might come back to this later. What I care, oh, oops, wrong one. Here it is, the alter ego. So Nadia Van Dyne, 3 recovery. And what we care about here is her girl ability, which is an action. And she's genius, so that's important too. Shuffle up to 2 cards with a printed mental resource icon from your discard pile into your deck. Absolutely crucial, in my opinion, to all of the decks that I create for Wasp, but especially crucial to some extra things with regard to using these risky elements of the pool deck. So let's go back to the deck. Okay, so we'll get back to those riskier elements again in a little bit, but first let's just quickly mention the allies. So first of all, there's Gambit. The purpose of Gambit. Oh, that doesn't show his picture. Well, I'm not going to worry about that right now. When you play Gambit, so first of all, Gambit has X attack and X thwart and 3 health. We'll see what the X means in a little bit. So X is the number of boost icons on the card under Gambit, and here's how you get those boost icons. Gambit has this response. After Gambit enters play, look at the top 3 cards of the encounter deck and tuck one under him so that only the boost field is visible. So this is meant to help counteract the addition of extra encounter cards, and especially if you have Live Dangerously in play, that you know you're going to get an extra encounter card. So when Gambit comes into play, he gets to look at the top 3 cards in the encounter deck, and you'll be able to remove one of those 3. So you're looking at one, trying to get a card that has a lot of amplify icons, but more importantly than that, you'll be able to use that to remove a card that you don't want to have appear at the wrong time from the encounter deck. So that's why Gambit's in this deck. We also have Ironheart for card draw, plus has a mental resource icon. We have Moon Girl, who's one of the big ones in this deck, as all my Wasp decks. And she's the one that has the genius trait. You can play only if your identity has the champion or genius trait, and Wasp has the genius trait in the alter ego form, so you can only play this in alter ego form. But here's the response. After you play Moon Girl from your hand, draw 1 card for each mental resource icon used to pay for her. So that's why we have part of why we have all these quite a few allies with these mental resource icons. But in addition, we're going to go down to the resources here. We, of course, have energy, genius, and strength in this deck to help facilitate playing any cards. Genius being specifically important for helping to play Moon Girl and be able to draw those 3 cards. But also we have self-control in here, so the pool card. And this one allows you to double the number of resources of that this card generates if your identity has sustained less than 5 damage, which pretty much that ends up being the case all the time for Wasp in a deck like this that has so many allies to protect her and defend her. But also trip a resource instead if you have sustained no damage. And as the game progresses, that tends to be the case. Why is that? Well, that's because we also have healing factor in this deck. So that's a 3-cost upgrade, a pool card. Healing factor, max 1 per player, has a response. After the player phase begins, exhaust healing factor, heal 2 damage from your identity. So after a while, Wasp ends up with full health all the time. So then you end up with this real cool recursion. So when you go to alter ego form, you end up putting Moon Girl back in your deck, and a lot of times Nick Fury. And you also end up putting Genius back in your card or Self-Control back in your card. So that makes it really nice to facilitate playing Moon Girl or Nick Fury for that matter. In addition, you get all this card draw, giving you 2 other important elements of control in this deck. So this deck simultaneously brings in elements of chaos and risk, but then mitigates that chaos and risk with a card like Professor X. And already, Nick Fury is in this too, so he has the ability to draw 3 cards. But Nick Fury is the one who then, but then Professor X is your 3-cost ally with 3 thwart, also important. So he can confuse a villain. He has some other things he can do too, but typically you would confuse the villain. So that makes the deck less risky as you're getting extra encounter cards. But on top of that, we have this card here. Where is it? Get Ragey. So Get Ragey at max 1 per deck. It's a 0-cost event, and you can ready an ally. That ally gets +1 attack till the end of the phase. So that can be used on any of these cards. So including, any of the pool allies who don't take consequential damage, or if you need that extra thwarting from Professor X, he'll take 3 more thwart off. And you also have, utilize a Nick Fury, or if you want Moon Girl getting back actually into the discard pile to then put into your deck again right away, you could ready Moon Girl, have her do another 2 attack, or now 3 thwart, 2 thwart, and now 3 attack, get put in the discard pile, and then you put her back into your deck with Wasp's girl action again while you're in alter ego form. And then in addition to that, we have this very important card. So this is a critical card in the deck, which is not my responsibility. Another pool card, event card that costs 0, and it has an interrupt, which means you can use it in either alter ego side or hero side. When any amount of threat would be placed on a scheme, you or your ally take it as damage instead. So this is a really cool ability, because this gives you, when the villain schemes, that extra time because of an encounter card, you can stop that, or for any time you can stop that from happening. And it has a mental resource, so this is another one of those critical cards to put back in your deck, to have recycled back in because of all the card draw you have. This comes back into your hand regularly, and it's often a card that I will just keep in my hand a lot of the time, and because of the extra card draw, I don't end up minding that so much. Just in case of an emergency, this card sits in my hand in a lot of the plays to keep track of that. And here's the cool thing about it. Well, because I have healing factor, if that happens to be in play, I often don't mind if Wasp takes some extra damage, or because we have 10 allies in the deck as well. Typically I have 1, 2, or even 3 of these out at a time, and I could just have one of them take the damage instead if necessary. So that card ends up becoming a really nice card in this deck to help, again, mitigate that risk factor. In addition, a couple of extra cards. We have Cutupper, another important one, because this has a hero action: deal 5 damage to an enemy, stun that enemy. So if the villain is stunned, they also have less of an ability to, that's 1 fewer attack that they'll make. And if they draw 2 cards and one of them happens to be an encounter card that causes the villain to attack, well, then you're only taking 1 attack instead. And Wasp has no problem with that. So for many reasons, but one of them being she has 11 hit points. And then, of course, we have allies to take the hit, and we have a healing factor to help heal afterwards. And then we also have, might as well mention this now, another player side scheme, Build Support, which is to help get Helicarrier out, to help cheapen the cards, but also Quinn Carrier, which helps to, whenever you need that, is a wild resource, but acts as a mental resource to help out with playing Moon Girl, but also helps out with Stick-to-Itiveness. So this is another upgrade from the pool aspect. So a 2-cost upgrade has a hero action, spend a physical resource and exhaust this card, ready your hero. So here you have another chance to ready your hero, which generally speaking, I don't care about readying the hero as much for this deck as many other decks, but there are some critical times when that can be, and no matter what, it can be really helpful for a number of reasons. So let's look at some of those reasons. So built within her own kit, she first of all has the Wasp helmet, which gives, when you're in giant form, gives +1 thwart, and when tiny hero form gives +1 attack. So readying the hero allows you to take advantage of that. And if you look at her abilities to begin with, so first of all, when she's in the tiny form, she only has 1 attack, so now she'll have 2. If she has that card out, so dealing 2 attack twice, But then when she's in giant hero form, that's not mentioned here, so I'll go find that one again at Hall of Heroes. Here we go. So when she's in giant hero form, she has 2 thwarts, so now she'll have 3 thwarts. So she has the ability to do 6 thwart altogether if she readies. And she has this cool ability when she's in giant hero form. The threat you remove using your basic thwart power can be divided among schemes as you choose. So that can be super effective here. And she has the same ability, corresponding ability with her attack. Damage, so it's only 2 attack, but damage you deal using your basic attack power can be divided among enemies as you choose. And I literally, in my last game I played, I had 2 toughs that I got rid of in one shot. So 1 tough on an ally and another tough on the villain. So those are pretty cool. So readying Wasp is still effective, even if it's not the most awesome thing in the world. It's still good. It's not without benefit, and especially if you can have that regularly available. And in this deck you do, because once again, we have Helicarrier to provide a wild resource. So since Wasp Helmet wants you to use, not that one, since Stick-to-Itiveness wants you to use a physical resource, that wild resource is always available when that card is in play. And then one card I haven't mentioned yet is, a regularly one to be included in Wasp decks, which is Ingenuity, right? A 2-cost basic, and you can only play this if your identity has the genius trait. So once again, you can only play this when you're in the alter ego form, but the resource can be used. So exhaust Ingenuity, generate a mental resource. That can happen because it just says resource, doesn't say alter ego resource. So that can be used in either alter ego form or hero form. So real quickly then, the villains tested against. So I didn't test this against a lot of villains. So it would be great if some people tried out this deck and did test it against some other villains or even these villains to see their result. But I had tested against Claw and Sabretooth, once in standard for both of them, once in expert. And what I did find actually is that I tended not to play Live Dangerously when I played them in standard because the game was over relatively quickly. So I would use sometimes Deadpool Core Ship, and definitely I use the Pool Allies, even if I didn't have Deadpool Core Ship out there. But generally speaking, I didn't get Live Dangerously out. But in both of my expert plays, because those tend to last longer and because you tend to need a big burst of damage at the end, I did end up playing Live Dangerously in those cards. So once again, as a reminder, when you play Live Dangerously, yes, you are living dangerously, especially with that extra icon, that hazard icon there. But your identity gets +2 hand size, and actually each identity does, but I'm playing this in solo, so just my identity got the +2 hand size. But it tends not to be as risky as it sounds, because you can get rid of this anytime by thwarting it for 3, and then it gets removed. So we mentioned that before. But also you have no choice. You have to get rid of it relatively soon no matter what, because of this other icon, right? The crisis icon prevents you from getting rid of the thwart that's on, from thwarting the main scheme and getting rid of that threat there. And you're going to have to do that quickly, because if you have this card out here, you also have the amplify icon, you have an acceleration icon, and then these allies, these pool allies might add another. I did have an instance where I think it was Bob. Yeah, I had Bob out and he had this acceleration icon. So that's 2 acceleration icons out there at the same time. So that adds up quickly. So you end up getting rid of it pretty fast. Both times I found that I had it out there for 2 rounds. And it gave me that extra 2 hand size, and I just blasted the villain. So that's the other advantage of Wasp. Her big attacks, right? So she has 5 attack cards. So first of all, she has not rapid growth. That's not the one. Wasp Sting. So a 2-cost event that'll do 4 damage in giant form, again spread out amongst enemies as you choose, and in tiny hero form 5 damage. So that's not a lot to write home about, but it can add up and it helps to keep the board clear. But Pinpoint Strike is the big one. So 3 points of damage. 3 cost, an attack card, deals 7 points of damage to an enemy. However, if you're in tiny hero form, it deals 1 additional damage to that enemy and gains overkill. And when you have minions out there, that becomes a really nice way to both get rid of the minion and deal damage. However, because you're getting all this card draw, very often you'll get 2 of these pinpoint strikes in your hand. And in addition to the fact that they have mental resource icons, so you recycle them back into your deck somewhat regularly as well. So when you want that big burst of damage at the end, doing 8 damage and 8 damage, plus having some allies and your hero dealing extra damage, you can do that a significant amount of burst damage to finish off the villain in the final stage. And that is exactly what happened when I did use Live Dangerously against those expert villains. And I think that's especially critical to note that about, who is it? Sabretooth, because Sabretooth is the villain who heals himself every time that he activates. So after he attacks you, he discards a card from his deck and he heals up based on how many of those, what are they called? Those boost icons, how many boost icons are there? He heals himself. And then the same thing occurs when he schemes. So leaving him at full health for a while until you're ready to do a significant amount of damage really works well with this deck. So even though this is, quote, the risky deck, this is a relatively unrisky deck if you play it utilizing those strategies of bringing back Professor X. Notice, by the way, Professor X also has the mental resource icon here, if I didn't mention that earlier. So you can recycle him back into your deck and continue to confuse the villain. And as I mentioned, getting Not My Responsibility back into your deck, keeping in your hand extra turns if necessary. And I ended up not minding that much because we have plenty of resource generators and plenty of card draw. So keeping it in my hand for those emergency situations paid off a number of times when I was playing this deck. In any case, I had a lot of fun doing this deck. Like I said, I don't usually have decks that have the riskier cards in it when I do pool. That's just not in my nature. But felt like I really stretched myself in this due to the challenge from Winning Hand with Boom Guy and Andy R. So I appreciate that. Made it fun for me. And I hope some of you try this deck out and let me know how it works out for you. So maybe some of you will play it in a riskier way than I do. In any case, however you play it, I'd love to hear the results. Please, if you enjoy this material, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel to grow. And please make comments too, which I really enjoy having discussions with people in the comments. All right, have a great one, everybody.